What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and after watching the Doctor Strange 2 Fate trailer and just existing on social media, the number one question people have been asking is, what are the new monsters? Everybody wants to know. And a lot of people were speculating that it was Chthon. And it kind of makes sense. The biggest problem with that is that as the trailer goes on, there is actually a point where when the Scarlet Witch lands, there's a second one behind her. Not only that, Scarlet Witch and Wong are both looking past the camera, and Wong is brandishing his weapons, his magical shield and whatnot, which indicate that they're looking at enemies that way. Now, the fact that these two monsters are looking at them and they're looking the other way indicates there's more monsters in the space. So in effect, I would surmise they're probably surrounded. So the question is, what are these things? Now, you guys aren't far off if they're what I think they are. Now, keep in mind, Marvel Cinematic Universe changes stuff all the time, but if they're what I think they are, the idea of Chthon is actually incredibly accurate. So here's what we're gonna do. Gather around, children, gather around. Papa Rob is gonna tell you a story. So in the video that we did about Khonshu, or about Moon Knight, where we talked about Khonshu basically being the brother of the Panther god Bast, and that this is a way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe can actually link the Moon Knight mythos directly to the Black Panther mythos and basically say they're relatives in terms of their form and function. We talked about the whole idea of the war between the Elder Gods, right? That at the beginning of all things on Earth, there were the Elder Gods. You had Chthon and a whole bunch of other people. They ended up descending into absolute madness. They went to war with each other, and then the sentience of Mother Earth basically got knocked up by a being called a tomb, which destroyed all the Elder Gods. But people like Chthon managed to find a way out. The way this worked, and it's really, really, really cool. It's a combination of things that we actually get this from. Some of it is from old school stories like Marvel Preview number 7, and then some of it comes from relatively newer things like Darkhold pages from the Book of Sin number 3 or number 7 or something like that in 1993, right? So you kind of get it from different sources. But the overall gist here is that following the destruction of the Elder Gods at the hands of a tomb who went into the sun and became Amun-Ra, that Chthon had taken off to his own dimension that was called the Flickering Realms. Now, the reason why they call it the Flickering Realms is because it quite literally changes consistently. It can be virtually anything, right? So one moment it can be like an entire realm made of ice. The next moment it can be essentially hell as far as you're concerned, right? Fire, brimstone, eternal damnation, that kind of a thing, right? So it just flickers and changes all the time. Now, when Chthon created that realm, he created it as what was called an inner plane. And the reason why is because if you think about dimensions in Marvel Comics as something akin to the rings of Saturn, right? Earth itself being the main planet, and then the planes of existence being the rings of Saturn, the further out you go, the more you get into the outer planes. So this whole realm of the Flickering Realms was called the inner planes because what it did is it allowed Chthon to maintain proximity to Earth so that he could actually influence what was going on in Earth. Hence the reason why he created the Darkhold, and then it was on Earth for people to access and then use, and basically he would grant them a portion of his power, but he would in turn take their soul. So very similar to Mephisto, albeit without the trickery. But the thing about this is that inside of his own realm, before he essentially went and started sleeping, right? Because he literally just kind of went into a slumber, is how Marvel explains it. What he did is he created a race. Now, this is where things get a little murky here. He created a group that was called the Ngari, I think is how you pronounce it. Technically, it's spelled N''Garai. So I don't know exactly how you pronounce that. But basically, this was a race that had actually occupied Earth for a period of time. This kind of interdimensional period, or I guess interperiod between the destruction of the Elder Gods and then when humanity started taking its rightful place, but before the Celestials showed up to basically mess with humanity and modify their genes. And so the Ngari ruled Earth for a few million years, and then ultimately the Ngari were defeated. Now, in Marvel Preview number 7, we're never really given an answer as to why, right? It's literally a story that focuses on some girl named Satana, who's not important at all, but the thing about it is just some force defeated them, and that's all we really get. But the thing about this is that the Ngari were basically created by Chthon for the purpose of carrying out his schemes and his machinations. Now, let's look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a few things to notice here looking at this trailer. One, they're all red. Now, the whole idea behind this is you could say, well, maybe it's just the environment that they're in. To a degree, maybe, but Wong does not have a red tinge about him. He doesn't look red, right? I mean, he's just a guy. He looks like his normal self, right? Just Wong, So because of that, they basically match the Scarlet Witch in appearance. Now, as we know, the Scarlet Witch manipulates chaos magic, and chaos magic is literally the source of power from Chthon. Is one of the only people, I think he and the Scarlet Witch are the only ones who can actually use chaos magic. Technically, Doctor Strange could invoke it if he tried, but he doesn't mess with that kind of magic. And so at the end of the day, like Chthon being really the source of chaos magic makes him absurdly powerful. I would go as far as to argue Chthon is probably the second most powerful magic wielder in the entirety of existence in Marvel Comics, the only exception being Zom. And Zom was so powerful, it took the Living Tribunal to defeat him, right? And then lock him away in some dimension somewhere. And so where Doctor Strange can invoke the power of Zom, he rarely ever does it. And when he does, it's just a tiny little bit of it. Otherwise, he risks being completely possessed by Zom and then basically being a vector for Zom to show back up in the main Marvel Universe, in which case everybody would be screwed. Like, no one would be able to overpower Zom. Infinity Gauntlet or not, no one would be able to overpower that guy. It's just a whole different level of power. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the thing about this is that looking at Chthon, right? Chthon, while he's not necessarily a Crimson character, right? That's more Sidorak, who is basically imbued by the color red. Historically speaking, in terms of how Chthon's been depicted in relation to the Scarlet Witch, red has basically been the primary color. And that seems to be the theme in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with this, right? The whole idea of the multiverse of madness, that America Chavez is actually the one teaching Doctor Strange about the multiverse instead of the other way around, so on and so forth. And so it's one of those things where it really does look like it's the Ngari race. Now, what does this mean if it is? The reality here is that while the Ngari were very powerful in Marvel Comics, in truth, I would say they're probably just going to be regular run-of-the-mill henchmen around here, albeit on a magical and far more powerful level than we're traditionally used to seeing. Now, do I think that means that we're going to see Chthon in this movie? I would say probably not. I don't think we'd really see Chthon here, and here's the reason why. Chthon's a big bad, right? This guy's a big deal. I mean, it's huge. Like, you think Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet was a problem? No. That guy's nothing compared to the power of Chthon. He's on a wholly different level. And so I have a hard time believing, because from what we've seen in the various rumors that are coming out here, and really even Marvel seems to have confirmed it, that the evil Doctor Strange, which largely seems to be the what-if version of Doctor Strange, is the main villain of this film. That's kind of what's, the discussion that's happening as far as the scuttlebutt. So not 100% sure. We won't really know until the movie definitively comes out. But if that's the case, Chthon's not going to be an afterthought villain, right? He's not going to be a guy where it's just like, well, evil Doctor Strange was the prelude, and now Chthon is the main bad guy. If anything, I would say this would serve as a vector. If we were going to see some kind of enemy, like some kind of main bad guy within the realm of the dimension of the Ngari, it would probably be Kirok the Damned. He was the leader of the Ngari group, right? The Ngari race. Like, he was like smarter than all of them. He was like their chieftain, ridiculously powerful, more than enough for Doctor Strange, and I wouldn't be surprised if it would require the efforts of Doctor Strange and Wanda and Wong in order to overpower that guy, right? I mean, it's crazy how powerful he is. When he first showed up, it was actually because Cyclops was losing his mind and basically ended up hitting an obelisk, which accidentally freed Kirok the Damned. Literally, his arrival just overwhelmed Professor Xavier because of how evil he was. Xavier just, like, his mind just couldn't handle it. And you're talking about the most powerful telepath in the universe. So it's kind of crazy when you get to that level of just pure evilness, let alone the power that goes with it. But what I will say, and what I wouldn't be surprised about when it comes to this, is that this would be a vector and lead into the whole thing with Chthon at some future point in time. And the reason why is because, as you guys know, when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they are in a lot of ways about the slow build, right? I mean, it literally took them 10 years to get to the Infinity Saga. And while Feige and them have come out and said they don't really intend to do any more 10-year arcs, it would make sense that if they were going to bring Chthon in as a major player, as a major villain for Wanda or Doctor Strange or whoever to face off against, because it looks like they're largely building up the magical side as kind of its own thing, right? And that goes wherever it ends up going. It would make sense that they wouldn't necessarily introduce him here. Instead, what they would do is they would say, okay, so Chthon became aware of Wanda when she started messing with the Darkhold. And it's just kind of like, damn, like, I wonder how powerful this girl is. So I wouldn't be surprised with everything that's going on. Chthon is watching, and Chthon is just kind of waiting for his perfect time to be able to intervene and to act. I wouldn't necessarily say he lured Wanda there to the dimension of the Ngari in order to see her face off against them and get an idea of how powerful she is. I would say, if anything, he's just kind of waiting and watching. As far as why it is that they're there, I wouldn't be surprised if the movie has some sort of element where, like, they have to go gather individual things, or they're trying to understand what's going on with the multiverse, what's leading to these chaotic events, right? That whole scene, that whole situation may be fairly early on, right? And like the catalyst behind it is basically Shumagorath showing up on Earth and Doctor Strange just being like, okay, something's off. This guy shouldn't be here. How did this guy get here? And then as he goes and investigates, he comes across America Chavez or whatever it is, while he's fighting against Shumagorath, because she's in that scene. And then in turn, the two of them end up going on quote unquote an adventure across the multiverse, or however that whole plot unfolds. But they're basically there because they need to be, right? Because, some kind of artifact or something has to be gathered, but that area requires their attention. And while they're there, suddenly they come across the Angari. But again, I'm not swearing by any of this, right? I'm not telling you guys this is an absolute, definitively, that's what's going on. But if you're asking for my best guess on what I think those monsters are, my best guess is that they're the Angari. They were a race created by Chthon for the purpose of conquering and subjugating basically beings on Earth, and were ultimately defeated somewhere along the line, and were just sent back to their dimension, which exists inside the dimension of Chthon, right? So basically like a closet in a house. It's kind of how their realms work together. So with that being said, guys, I'm really curious to see how this plays out. I mean, the movie these trailers just get me more and more excited. These little TV spots and whatnot get me more and more excited. Tickets go on sale this week. I'm getting mine as soon as they're available. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.